In the town of Nambudo, family dinners were always something people looked forward to. The whole compound would come alive with laughter, voices of children running around, and the delicious smell of roasted meat mixed with spicy jollof rice. That evening, Ao and his wife Nia walked into his parents' home, holding hands. On the outside it looked like just another warm gathering where stories would be shared and plates would be filled, but deep inside Nia's heart, a quiet storm was brewing. She had learned to smile through it, to greet everyone politely, and to sit gracefully at the table, even when whispers followed her wherever she went. The house was decorated with bright fabrics, clay pots filled with steaming soups, and cousins rushing about serving food. Everyone looked so happy, but Nia could feel eyes on her, judging, questioning, waiting for the chance to remind her of the one thing she did not have, a child. Ao noticed the heaviness in her steps, the way her fingers tightened around his hand, and he gave her a small squeeze, silently promising to stand by her side. The feast had only just begun, but something told Nia this night would not be an ordinary one. Backhand index pointing right kia apichat ho main of isi style main outline to be expand karun? Nia had been Ao's wife for 3 years, and in those 3 years, she had poured nothing but love, patience and kindness into their home. Everyone in the neighborhood admired her. Children in the street ran to her because she always had sweets in her bag or kind words on her lips. Old women praised her for her respectful nature, and the men in the village often said Ao was blessed to have found a wife like her. To the outside world, Nia's life looked beautiful and whole, but only she knew about the pain that pressed against her chest every single day. It had been 3 years since her wedding, yet her womb had not carried a child. Every month she prayed, she hoped, she even whispered to the night sky, begging God to bless her with a baby. But month after month, her hands remained empty, and as much as she smiled in public, inside she felt her heart slowly breaking. The whispers never helped. They followed her everywhere. In the market, at the well, even at church. Women lowered their voices, but their words still found her. Such a shame, so beautiful yet barren. Maybe Ao should take another wife. Those sentences pierced her like knives. She tried to pretend she didn't hear them, but deep inside they echoed louder than drums. At night, when the world was asleep, she would sit at the edge of her bed and cry softly, hiding her tears from Ao. She never wanted him to see her pain because he always reassured her with gentle words. Nia, you are enough for me. But in her heart, she wondered if love alone could silence the pressure from his family, especially his mother, Mama Ifyunanya, who had already begun dropping sharp comments that cut deeper than any sword. Nia carried her silent wounds with grace. She never raised her voice, never fought back, never complained. She just smiled, even when her heart was bleeding. And though no one could see the weight she carried, every step she took felt like walking with a heavy stone tied to her chest. Backhand index pointing right kia. The food was served in large bowls, steaming hot, with the rich smell of roasted goat meat and spicy rice filling the air. The family gathered around the long wooden table, laughter echoing here and there as cousins passed plates and uncles argued over who got the biggest portion. Nia sat quietly beside Ao, carefully spooning food onto her plate, her smile small but polite. She wanted to enjoy the evening, to blend into the warmth of the family, but her heart already felt heavy. Then, just as the chatter grew louder, Mama Ifyunanya cleared her throat. The room fell into a natural hush, as it always did whenever she spoke. With her head held high and a cruel smile curling at her lips, she said, "Some women eat and eat, yet their wombs remain empty." Her words floated in the air, sharp and poisonous, cutting deeper than any knife. Everyone at the table froze. They all knew who she was talking about. Nia felt her face burn as though hot oil had been poured over her. Her hand trembled on her spoon, and she quickly lowered her gaze to the floor. She wished the ground would open and swallow her whole. The laughter that had filled the room just moments ago died instantly, replaced by a thick silence that pressed against Nia's chest. Mama Ifyunanya did not stop there. She leaned back in her chair and added, almost mockingly, "A woman's true crown is her children. Without them, what is she really?" Her eyes flicked toward Nia, making sure her words landed exactly where she wanted them to. No one dared to speak. A few relatives glanced at each other, uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge the matriarch. Some shifted in their seats, pretending to focus on their food, while others swallowed hard, afraid of being caught in the crossfire. The silence became heavier than the insult itself. Nia's throat tightened. She forced back the tears that threatened to spill. Inside, her heart cracked a little more, the wound reopening with fresh pain. She had endured whispers from straw. The room fell into a silence so heavy that even the clinking of spoons against plates stopped. All the laughter, all the chatter, disappeared as if someone had stolen the joy out of the air. Nia sat frozen, her hands trembling on her lap. She lowered her head quickly so no one could see the tears forming in her eyes, but it was too late. The sting of her mother-in-law's words had already carved themselves deep into her heart. Her chest rose and fell unevenly as shame wrapped around her like a burning cloth. It felt hotter than fire, heavier than stone. Her ears rang with the insult, the cruel words replaying again and again. Eat and eat, yet the womb remains empty. Each syllable echoed in her head, making her feel smaller, weaker, more exposed than ever before. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the chair, to be swallowed by the ground beneath her. She could feel the eyes of everyone at the table on her. Some were filled with pity, others with curiosity, and a few with silent judgment. Nobody spoke up, and that silence cut her even deeper. Their silence was agreement. Their silence was betrayal. Nia's vision blurred as tears pressed against her eyelids. She blinked quickly, forcing them back, determined not to give Mama Ifeanyi the satisfaction of seeing her break. But inside she was already crumbling. Her heart felt like shattered glass, scattered and sharp. She had heard whispers from strangers before, but hearing her own family, her own husband's mother, tear her apart in public was like a knife twisted in her soul. For a moment she thought about standing up, about running away, about escaping the prison of humiliation closing in on her. But her body refused to move. She sat there still, trapped between the weight of shame and the eyes of a family too afraid to defend her. And in that silence Nia realized something painful. Sometimes it is not only the words that hurt the most, but the silence of those who refuse to stand for you. Backhand index pointing right Kia A. The silence that followed was heavier than any insult Mama Ifeanyi had thrown. Plates sat untouched, spoons rested midair, and the air seemed to freeze. A few relatives glanced at each other, their eyes darting nervously as if they wanted to say something but feared the consequences. Others bowed their heads quickly, pretending to be busy with their food, as though hiding their faces could hide their guilt. Nobody wanted to be the one to challenge the matriarch of the family. For Nia, that silence was louder than thunder. It roared in her ears, drowning out every sound in the room. It wasn't just her mother-in-law's words that broke her heart. It was the fact that nobody stood up for her. Not an aunt, not a cousin, not even the elders who always claimed to value fairness. The silence felt like betrayal, and it cut deeper than the insult itself. She lifted her eyes for just a moment, scanning the faces around the table. She saw pity in some, discomfort in others, and even a flicker of agreement in a few. Each expression stabbed her in a different way. Her chest tightened and she quickly dropped her gaze again, afraid that if she looked any longer, the tears she was holding back would fall. Her food had gone cold, but she no longer had an appetite. Her hands shook lightly as she pressed them into her lap, trying to steady herself. She felt like a stranger in the middle of a family she had given her love to. She had cooked with them, laughed with them, shared secrets with them. Yet when the time came to protect her, they abandoned her in silence. Nia's heart whispered questions no one could answer. Am I really alone here? Is this what my life will always be? Mocked by my mother-in-law and ignored by the rest? Her soul ached, but still she kept her head down, swallowing her pain in silence. What Nia did not know was that the silence was about to be broken, not by her, but by the one person she least expected. Backhand index pointing right Kia AP Chat Ho Kamenab outline 6. Ao had sat in silence, watching, listening, his hand resting lightly on Nia's knee under the table. He had seen the way her fingers trembled, the way she bowed her head to hide the pain in her eyes. He had watched the family pretend nothing was wrong, pretending not to notice the cruelty his mother had just unleashed. His heart burned like fire, and the more he sat, the hotter the flames grew inside him. Then all at once he straightened in his chair. His jaw tightened, his eyes locked on his mother, and for the first time that evening, his voice cut through the heavy silence. Enough, Mama, he said. His words were not loud, but they carried the weight of thunder. The entire room froze. Even the children stopped moving, sensing the shift in the air. Mama Ifeanyi blinked, shocked that her son had dared to interrupt her. But Ao's eyes did not waver. They burned with a fire no one at that table had ever seen before. He was no longer the quiet son who always listened, always respected. He was a husband standing like a shield for his wife. Everyone's eyes moved back and forth between mother and son. The tension was so thick it could be cut with a knife. Relatives held their breath, waiting for what would happen next. Nia slowly lifted her gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never heard Ao speak to his mother like that. His voice was firm, steady, and filled with power. For the first time that night, she felt a flicker of hope, like a small flame breaking through her darkness. Ao did not look away. His tone carried love, but it also carried strength, the kind of strength that comes from a man who knows his duty, not just as a son but as a husband. The table that had once been heavy with silence now trembled under the weight of truth that was about to be spoken. Backhand index pointing right kia aap cha. Ho main of outline 7. The words that shook the table koisi style main expand karun. The room went completely still as Ao's voice rose again, firm and steady, carrying a weight no one could ignore. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving his mother's face. "Do you think a child is only a woman's responsibility?" he asked, his words sharp and clear. You could hear the anger, but also the deep pain in his tone. "If there is no child, it could be my fault too. So if you want to call someone Barren, then call me as well." Gasps rippled across the table. A few relatives dropped their spoons, the clatter echoing like thunder in the tense silence. Some covered their mouths, stunned that Ao had said such words openly in front of everyone. Others glanced nervously at Mama Ifunanya, waiting for her fiery reaction. But for the first time in a long while, the powerful matriarch was speechless. Nia's heart stopped for a moment. Her lips trembled as tears filled her eyes again. But this time they were not tears of shame. They were tears of relief. She had carried the weight of blame for years, always seen as the problem, always the one whispered about. But now, her husband had stood in front of the world and said what no one else dared to say. That she was not alone, that the burden did not belong to her alone. Ao's words hung heavy in the air, shaking not just the table but the foundation of the family's beliefs. For generations, women had been the ones blamed, mocked, and shamed whenever children did not come. But now Ao had broken that silence. His truth struck through the room like lightning, exposing the unfairness everyone had accepted quietly for years. The dinner that was meant to be a celebration turned into a moment none of them would ever forget. And as Ao's words settled over the room, everyone knew the tide had turned. The silence was broken, and nothing would ever be the same again. Backhand index pointing right kia aap cha. Ho main of outline 8. The power of truth koisi emotional or viral style main expand karun. Ao's words hung in the air like a heavy drumbeat, shaking the hearts of everyone seated at the table. For years, the family had grown used to Mama Ifunanya's sharp tongue. She often threw careless words at daughters-in-law, pointing out their flaws, mocking their struggles, and blaming them for things beyond their control. Nobody ever dared to challenge her. People either laughed nervously, stayed quiet, or changed the subject. But this time was different. This time, her own son had spoken up, and his words carried the weight of truth that could not be ignored. For the first time, someone had dared to say what needed to be said, that a child is not only a woman's responsibility, that infertility is not a curse carried only by the wife, that it could also be the man or perhaps destiny itself that holds the answer. It was a truth many already knew deep inside but were too afraid to admit. Ao had broken years of silence with just a few sentences, and in doing so he shattered a cruel tradition. The relatives sat in shock, their eyes wide, their hearts pounding. Some looked down at their plates, ashamed for the times they had whispered about Nia behind her back. Others nodded quietly, realizing Ao had spoken for every woman who had ever suffered the same pain in silence. His words didn't just defend Nia. They defended countless women across Nambuto, who were silently carrying the same burden. Nia sat still, her hands trembling as she tried to take in what had just happened. For years, she had walked with her head bowed, believing she was the only one at fault. But Ao's boldness changed everything. His words gave her strength she didn't know she had. They lit a fire of hope inside her heart, reminding her that she was not to be shamed, not to be diminished, not to be treated as less. That evening, truth spoke louder than tradition. And once truth enters a room, even the sharpest tongue cannot silence it. Backhand index pointing right kia ap chat ho main of outline 9 Nia's t. Nia turned her head slowly and looked at Ao, her lips trembling as if they wanted to speak but no words could escape. Her eyes, already heavy with unshed tears, finally gave way, and the drops slid silently down her cheeks. But these tears were different from the ones she had cried in secret at night. They were not born of shame or humiliation. These were tears of relief, tears that carried the weight of years of silent suffering finally lifted from her shoulders. For so long, she had walked through life feeling invisible in her pain. People saw her beauty, her smile, her graceful ways, but no one ever saw the bleeding wound she carried inside. No one ever stood for her when whispers chased her in the market or when mocking eyes followed her in church. She had learned to swallow her pain quietly, to wear her silence like a mask. But in that moment when Ao's words cut through the air like a sword, she felt something she had not felt in years. She felt seen. She stared at her husband, her protector, her shield, and her heart swelled with love so strong it almost hurt. His voice had been her healing. With one sentence, he had mended what countless nights of tears could not fix. She had always known he loved her, but now she saw the depth of it, the kind of love that stands tall even in front of family, even against tradition. The pain that had weighed her down for 3 long years seemed to loosen its grip. For the first time, Nia felt that maybe she was not cursed, not less of a woman, not unworthy. She realized she did not have to fight alone. She had a partner who would fight beside her. Her tears fell freely now, but she did not hide them. These were not tears of weakness but tears of victory. Tears that spoke louder than words. She was no longer alone. Backhand index pointing right kia ap chat ho main of outline 10. The mother-in-law's shock isi style main expand Karun? Mama Ifunanya sat frozen in her chair, her back stiff, her lips pressed tightly together. Just moments earlier, she had spoken with the boldness of a queen, certain that her words would be respected, certain that her son would quietly agree or at least remain silent as he always had. She was used to her voice being the final word at the table, her opinions treated like law. But now, before the entire family, her own son had turned her words into dust. Her proud face slowly fell. The confidence in her eyes dimmed as Ao's voice echoed in her ears. If you want to call someone Barren, then call me too. Those words stung her in a way she had not expected. She had wanted to humiliate Nia, to remind her of her place, but instead, her son had exposed the cruelty behind her insult. He had stripped the mask of authority from her face and revealed her harshness for what it was. The room was still, every eye watching her, waiting for her reaction. Normally, she would fire back with even sharper words, ready to crush anyone who dared to oppose her. But this time nothing came. Her throat felt dry, her tongue heavy. She opened her mouth slightly, but no words followed. For once, the mighty Mama Ifunanya was speechless. A flicker of unease passed across her face. She could feel her control slipping, the respect she commanded trembling at the edge of collapse. Her pride told her to fight back, but her heart whispered another truth. Her son was right, and that truth left her powerless. She glanced at Nia, who now sat with tears streaming down her face, not from shame but from love and relief. Something inside Mama Ifunanya twisted uncomfortably. She had expected her daughter-in-law to sit broken, humiliated. Instead, Nia looked stronger, shielded by Ao's words. For the first time in years, Mama Ifunanya felt the sting of silence. Not the silence of others but her own. Backhand index pointing right kia ap cha. Ho main of outline 11. The family's murmurs ko isi style main expand Karun? A low ripple moved through the table, soft at first, like the wind passing through dry leaves. Relatives who had been sitting stiff and silent began whispering to one another. Some covered their mouths with their hands, speaking in hushed tones, but their eyes betrayed their shock. They had never seen Mama Ifunanya silenced before, and certainly not by her own son. A few of the uncles nodded slowly, their faces thoughtful, as though Ao had voiced something they had long known but never dared to say aloud. One aunt leaned closer to another and whispered, "He is right. Why do we always blame the women?" Her words carried the quiet truth that many around the table had been too afraid to admit. Heads began to nod. A quiet wave of agreement spread from one end of the table to the other. Others turned their eyes toward Nia. But this time the looks were different. No longer filled with pity or judgment, their eyes held a new kind of respect. They saw her not as a woman to be mocked, but as someone who had endured cruelty with grace. They saw her as a woman worth defending, and in that moment, many hearts softened toward her. The atmosphere of the dinner shifted completely. The heavy shame that had filled the air just minutes ago seemed to lift. The silence that once felt like betrayal was now broken by murmurs of support. Even the younger cousins, who had been too busy eating and laughing before, sat straighter, sensing the importance of what had just happened. Mama Ifunanya, still quiet, could feel the shift too. She knew the control she once held in the family was slipping, and the murmurs of her relatives made it clear. Her cruelty had been exposed. For Nia, those whispers felt like a gentle balm on her wounds. For the first time, she was no longer the only one carrying the burden. She could feel the room slowly moving to her side. Backhand index pointing right kia a picha. Hoka main outline 12. A voice for every woman isi style main expand Karun? Ao's eyes swept across the table, firm and unshaken. His voice carried the strength of a man who was no longer speaking just for himself but for every woman who had ever been silenced. No woman should ever be insulted for something she cannot control, he said. His words sharp yet filled with love. The room grew even quieter, every ear straining to catch each word. A wife is not valuable because she gives children. She is valuable because she is human. The words struck the hearts of everyone seated there. They were simple, yet they carried a truth too powerful to deny. For years, many at that table had seen women mocked and shamed. They had seen wives bend under the weight of cruel words, believing they were worthless without children. But now Ao's voice tore through that belief, exposing it as a lie. Nia's breath caught in her throat. She felt her chest rise and fall, her heart beating faster, as though every word was wrapping around her like a shield. She had never heard anyone speak this way, not even in church. It was as if her husband's words were not only defending her but speaking life into every woman who had ever been blamed unfairly. Some relatives lowered their eyes, guilt written across their faces. They remembered the times they had whispered, the times they had laughed at jokes about barren women, never thinking of the pain those words carried. Others sat still, their eyes fixed on Ao, stunned by his courage. Even the younger ones, the nieces and nephews who didn't fully understand, sensed the weight of his words. They would remember this moment. They would grow up knowing that love is not measured by the children a woman bears, but by the respect and humanity she is given. That dinner table, once filled with laughter and food, had become a place of truth and change. And as Ao's words settled in the hearts of everyone present, the silence that followed was no longer heavy with shame, but with reflection. Backhand index pointing right kia aap chat homene. The story of that night did not stay confined to the walls of Mama Ifunanya's house. By morning, neighbors were whispering about it in the market, their voices a mix of awe and disbelief. "Did you hear what Ao said to his mother?" one woman asked another, shaking her head. "He told her to stop blaming Nia. He said a woman is not valuable just because she bears children." Word traveled fast through Nambuto, carried on the lips of shopkeepers, market women, and children running errands. At the local gatherings and church services, people repeated Ao's words. Men who had never considered the weight of their wives' struggles paused, listening to the truth spoken so boldly. Women who had endured years of whispers, judgment, and shame felt a flicker of hope. Maybe finally someone would see them for who they really were, not just as mothers or wives, but as human beings worthy of love and respect. Some husbands went home that evening and looked at their wives differently. They noticed the tired lines in their faces, the quiet strength in their hands, and the unspoken pain they had carried silently for years. The lesson was clear. Blaming a woman alone for a childless marriage was cruel and unfair. It was not tradition or gossip that defined a woman's worth, but her humanity. Even families who had once mocked or shamed their daughters-in-law began to rethink their words. Conversations changed at future gatherings. People learned to pause before making judgments. And somewhere, a woman who had been living under constant criticism felt a little lighter, knowing that the words spoken by one man had sparked a wave of change across the town. Nia, unaware of the ripples spreading through Nambuto, simply felt the warmth of her husband's hand on hers that night. But slowly, as people spoke of Ao's courage, she realized that what had started at one dinner table had grown into a lesson that would touch hearts far beyond her home. The town was beginning to understand that Back at home, the night was calm, the soft glow of the lantern casting warm light across the room. Nia sank into the couch and let out a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. She rested her head on Ao's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear. For the first time in years, a weight she hadn't been able to name lifted off her chest. She closed her eyes and let herself feel the relief, the quiet joy, the unspoken victory that filled the room. This victory was different from the ones people expected her to have. It wasn't about a child, or carrying a legacy, or fulfilling the dreams of a family that had judged her harshly. No, this victory was about something deeper. It was about being seen, being defended, being valued not for what she could give, but for who she was. And tonight, Ao had stood by her, unwavering, a shield between her and the cruelty that had weighed on her for so long. She could still feel the sting of the insults, the memory of the whispers, but now they no longer had power over her. His words had carried her through the humiliation and shame, and now his presence carried her through the aftermath. She felt safe, loved, and understood, feelings she had longed for but rarely allowed herself to hope for. Ao gently squeezed her hand, and she looked up at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He smiled softly, brushing a stray hair from her face. "You never needed thanks," he said. "You deserved this all along." That night, Nia realized that true victory was not about meeting society's expectations. It was about having someone by your side who sees your worth and refuses to let anyone take it away. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel proud, not of what she could give, but of who she was, loved, protected, and finally free from the heavy shadows of judgment. Backhand index pointing right Kia AAP Chat Ho Main of Outline 15. A redefinition of family KOISI. From that day on, the family dinners in Nambuto were never the same again. The long wooden table, once filled with tension and whispers, now held laughter that was warm and genuine. Conversations flowed freely, and the teasing that had once cut like knives was replaced with words of kindness and respect. Mama Ifunanya no longer spoke with cruelty, her sharp tongue softened by the truth her son had spoken that night. Even the relatives who had stayed silent for so long began to speak up, encouraging fairness and understanding instead of judgment. Nia moved through these gatherings with a lightness she had never known before. She laughed without fear, shared stories without worry, and felt truly seen by the family she had once thought might never accept her. Every smile she received was different now. It carried respect, not pity, and Ao remained by her side, her constant protector, reminding everyone that love is more than words. It is standing together even when the world expects you to bend. Their union became more than just a marriage. It became a lesson, a quiet revolution that shifted the hearts of everyone around them. Families in Nambuto began to talk differently about women, about marriage, and about respect. Nia and Ao became living proof that courage, truth, and love could break centuries of unfair tradition. At every dinner after that, no one forgot the night when words became shields, when silence was broken, and when a husband and wife showed that real strength is standing together, no matter how loud the voices of judgment may be. APK 15 outlines of fully expanded Hoge Hain 350 to 400 words Kahar part main, or Yipura 4,000 word emotional, viral script Bangaya high African setting or simple, engaging English Kasath. Agar AAP Chahen, main is poor script KOX single, polished 4,000 word story document main combine Karka ready Kar Dune publishing ya posting Kalia. Chahen maini Kar Dune.